Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Hi, Barry. It's good to see you again.
Good to be back together again.
I know. I'm enjoying these weekly chats. So, just to follow on what we talked about last week, we talked a little bit about codependency and how it had shown up in our lives. But we had a question which is like, well, what did you do to overcome it? So, what did you see, or what changed your way of thinking and being? So, I'd love for you to share first what you saw.
There's more than one way to do this to break free from codependency, and also what causes it. For me, I think the biggest piece was that I felt as that I wasn't in control of my own life.
Mm-hmm.
I felt I was so dependent upon other people for their approval and their need. And I was like walking around, it's almost like I had a beggar's cup going, please give me some approval, please give me some approval. That's the way I was feeling like inside, even though it wasn't obviously visible.
Mm-hmm.
But the feeling of needing somebody else to sort of make me okay was this ongoing struggle. And this wasn't even a relationship. This is just like where I was at work and in social engagements. I didn't feel like I was in charge of my own life at some point. So it really was dragging. And this probably started, should say, more exacerbated in my 20s when I was out of the house on my own, because I didn't have the safety net in the way of my family, which was very codependent too, as I mentioned last time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was where the training happened in my family. Of course, I know that's the way it happened. The training in our family prepares us for life outside the family. And so the same things happened. And for me, the biggest piece really was the fact that I couldn't navigate my way into whole healthy relationship with anybody, because I always felt this paradigm inside of like, I have to get from them before I can feel okay.
Yeah.
Like they'll make me feel better, or they'll make me feel less better because they'll say something negative about me, or something else will come up and I react to that from a place of like, my feelings are hurt because of what they said,
Mm-hmm.
which is, again, one of those epitomes of what codependency is like. It just feels like you have no boundaries or protection in a way.
Yeah.
And so the way through it for me was first to be aware. I mean, I talk about this in my work a lot with my clients. Awareness is the first step, because until you can see it, you can't change it. It's got to be visible. You got to understand what it is. And when I finally got clear that this whole thing was something I had control over inside of me, which was the first experience, because it wasn't up to them, it really was up to me.
Yeah.
Then I knew I could do something about it. And I happened to be in some very great, working with great teachers who really showed me that I could really sort of navigate back to myself. And that when I really started to learn how to, and I say the simplicity term, love myself, but when I learned how to appreciate myself and respect myself, I started realizing that I wasn't based on other people. Like my value system wasn't based on what other people said, thought, or told me. That I could be totally independent of that. And it was a very freeing experience. And I think the biggest way of doing that, I'm just thinking, which is the way I would recommend to other people, to the listeners of the audience, is really discovering that my value is my value. Like who I am is who I am. It sounds so simplistic in a way, but it really was bigger than that. To know that who I was enough, and that I wasn't needing anybody else to make me better or to make me feel whole.
Mm-hmm.
And of course that sounds so simplistic, I know.
Well, no, I completely agree with you. That's absolutely. And, like I shared last week, so I won't go over it again, but this sort of, I always used to feel like I had this bottomless pit that I was trying to get outside approval or whatever to fill me up. And it's just like, it is a bottomless pit. You put something in, it just falls all the way through. And it's like you want more, and it just is not satisfying. And I had, I was aware of it all my life. And I've been just like you. We were in the same spiritual circle for many years at USM. We got our masters from there in spiritual psychology. But even prior to that, I'd been on a spiritual journey because I had this thing of like, I got to make sense of this. This is just, my life is crazy. And like you said, my 20s were a little crazy. And if any ex-boyfriend out there is listening, I apologize profusely for my behavior. I was not a healthy person. But I always, I'd heard so much about, oh, we're all equal, we're all these spiritual beings. And I always had this thing of like, yeah, you, but not me. And like in 2009, I came across, this is after our USM experience, an understanding that just was so simple. My son calls it Buddhism for dummies. And it just boiled it down to the essence where I actually, for the first time, really got it. I got it not up here, but I got
Yeah.
it inside that I was equal to everybody else. Now, that had
Mhm.
been, growing up feeling like a little bastard, a little illegitimate, all that story was like, I'm not like other people. I'm not as deserving to be here as they are. But when I got that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience, and
Mhm.
the majority of us, I like to use the sort of percentages because it makes it clearer. But when I saw the majority of us, say like 95% of us are these spiritual beings, and this wonderful, lovely little human aspect of that shows up on this physical earth called Dell, that looks like Dell, and we all look
Mhm.
differently. Of course, when we compare ourselves on that level, we're always like, well, they're taller and skinnier and prettier and cleverer and all this, or more successful or more confident. When we do the comparison on the physical level, of course, there's differences. But when
Right.
you know that the majority of you is spiritual, and on that level, we are completely equal, it
Yes.
was like life changing for me. I was like, oh my God, I, I,
Mhm.
I've got everything that everybody else has got. I stopped looking for, as we say, people to complete me or people
Right.
to rescue me. I really felt it from the inside. I felt that whole closing up and filling
Mhm.
up. And something else you said about love, you wanted people to love you or give you love. The same thing. When I realized that we are what I say made of love, because are
Right.
not the spiritual essence, we are pure love
Yes,
and
absolutely.
peace. When
Agreed.
when I realized that I was made of love, there was no separate being that I had to learn to love. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because we always say, oh, we have to learn to love ourselves. And it was like, no, but I'm already made of love. I started to feel into that love I had within me. And when I realized that, other people weren't giving me love, it wasn't like it coming from the outside in. When I really saw, oh, these feelings of love are generating from within me, they're coming up through me. It was much, I didn't have to try to love myself. I didn't have to try to, it was just, well, I'm made of love, so of course I love myself. It's just natural. So those were huge. I had a few more insights, but I'd love
Mhm.
you to, chime in with what I've just said there. So
Well, absolutely. I've been on a spiritual path for, well, since '86. So yeah, I've been on this work for quite a long time, and definitely the recognition of that truth was clear that we're all one, we're all connected, we're all the same in that sense. We're all parts of spirit. At the same time, my human expression, my human appearance, that 5% as you were calling it, which I think sounds about right. Probably it's probably smaller than that ultimately.
exactly.
Was still attached to the idea that being human was all there was. So like the ego part of ourselves doesn't believe in spirit because ego is very much contained to the human form in the physical planet. So just put that into the conversation. And I found for myself the tendency to be in to ignore all the stuff I knew spiritually and just be in the human form where I could compare myself unfavorably with other people was
Mhm.
familiar. It was convenience. It was just a habit pattern.
Yeah.
And it was breaking the habit. And yes, that understanding of the love, and it was that self-love piece was really about filling up from the inside. So in a way, saying that we are loved, so therefore it's already automatic, is that it isn't. That that is very true. And the realization is that we oftentimes forget to open up the faucet, so to speak, inside, so the love can fill us up from the inside out.
Hmm.
Because that's the thing. I know, and a lot of people I know are very much wired in to get love from the outside, like I said, for a relationship, for appreciation, for even approval.
Hmm.
So to be able to recognize that it's just simply turning the faucet, so to speak, inside to let the love fill us up from inside, which is what the reality is.
Yeah.
It's so much easier. Well, I should say it's so much simpler. Not always easy, but so much simpler because the other part of this, and this is the conversation that we can get into as well, is we carry a lot of judgments about ourselves
Hmm.
with the way life happens, what we did right, what we did wrong, who did us harm, who didn't do things right for us, that sort of thing. And we carry this whole assortment of judgments inside that can keep us in a sense of righteousness and maybe superiority, but they separate us from that loving that we have inside.
Yeah.
Because that's the ego trying to hold position again. Because the thing about ego is it self-identifies as having an authority and having a place in the world, like an identity. And when we really fall into the self-love that we really are, this beingness of who we are as love, you can almost feel like we transcend that.
Mhm.
And so there's, for
Yeah.
me, I've always noticed this duality going on between the oneness and the wholeness of everything, because that's part of the spiritual work, and the ego saying, "Yes, but I exist, and I have this, this this thing going on." And
Yeah.
so this dance between the two is recognizing that the ego, which we all have, and we can't destroy the ego because it's part of what makes us human,
Yeah.
is something that is a great servant, but not a very good master.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
when we shift that focus point to be the compassionate guide as the spiritual part of ourselves, letting the ego express itself, but also giving it guidance along the way, is a much healthier way of living life, and also brings us back to the place of not needing to fall into the codependent trap, because the ego is not being fed so much from outside, because we can feed it from the inside out, like because of who we really are.
Yeah. A couple of things you just said there. I'm just trying to like. There was like I was like, oh, I got to comment.
I know.
One of the things, two. Oh, hang on. I've got to think. I want to talk about our thoughts, our negative thoughts in our head, and I want to talk about the ego, and I want to talk about love. So those three, I'm going to pick up on for a second. I remember my son, my youngest son, actually once saying to me, and this is a few years ago, and he said, "Why are you so loving?" And but in a lovely way, he said, "You're just so loving." And I said, God, it's like it just I can't help it. It's like just like you said, it's the faucet. I said it's I am so full of love. It just keeps pouring out. I don't know how
Right.
to, and he wasn't, it was in no way a criticism. It was just like it was almost like, God, I wish I could be a bit more like you. You're so loving.
An
Um,
appreciation. Yeah.
and it is like you said, it is that faucet that it just starts flowing out of you. You're so full of it. It's just that nature and those around you just emanate love. Then the other thing that I wanted to say about the thinking and the ego, 100%. I had this habitual habit of these thoughts. I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. I'm not, whatever those thoughts were. They
Hmm.
were so familiar to me. They were almost like, in like Times Square, we got that sort of thing that goes around the buildings. It was like
Yeah.
mine was like going around my head. It was like, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. You're stupid. You're this. You're all that stuff. It was constant. And what I didn't realize was I used to think my thinking was reminding me of who I was. Just like our
Yeah.
parents say, don't get too big for your boots or whatever it is. The higher you climb, the farther you fall. It was, I just thought it was just telling me who I was to remind me. And I had
Hmm.
no, and this is the other thing I saw when I came across this understanding in 2009 um, and like you said, when I got here in 81, I was on a spiritual path trying to make sense of my crazy upbringing and my crazy life. But
Yeah.
things just were, a lot of everything was in my head. Not a lot had landed, but that I always thought that I had to change the way I thought about myself to feel better. And what I did was I changed my relationship to these thoughts that passed through my head. I realized there were energy passing through. They were not telling me who I was. They were habitual thoughts that just kept going around and around and around, but they weren't telling me who I was. And
Right.
so instead of trying to change those thoughts and battle them and have affirmations and all this stuff all around me, I just started looking at my thinking as it's like, oh, you're visiting again. Oh, how funny. You're passing through again. And the less I was attached to them, the less I judged them, the less I fought with them and try and change them, they sort of
Hmm.
lost their strength and they just
Yeah.
sort of faded. I mean, they still show up now and again, but
Oh.
I'm onto them now. And I'll laugh
Yeah.
and I'll say, oh, you're visiting again today. I must be in a low mood or something. But it's really interesting how that I kept thinking another certification, another qualification will build the confidence in me. But I already, we're innately confident. We just
Hmm.
listen to these insecure thoughts that tell us that we're not. So as you
Right.
loosen that grip to that thinking, the more you tap into your own, like, oh wow, I'm pretty cool here, And one last thing very quickly about the ego. I used to think my ego was like, it was this big, like onyx monster that would hold me down on a mat, like on a wrestling mat, like hold me down and tell me things about myself. And I would battle with the ego. And then when I saw the ego was actually trying to hold me down to prevent me from getting hurt, putting myself out there, when I saw that it was misplaced, I had this image of this onyx big monster on top of me, just sort of almost shattering into a million little pieces. And it just sort of fell down around me. It was an amazing, it was like a dream I had. And it was like, oh, I don't need to battle the ego. It's just
Right.
doing what it does, but it's not going to control me anymore. So
Right.
anyway,
That's
that's what you sparked in me. So
well, then now you sparked something back for me. We follow this conversation. That's one of the things, the gifts in a way that we have with the ego, because the ego is what we use to get things done. Because again, it's the human expression of what we are about in the world. And when we don't necessarily let it run rampant, because that's what we've done up until this point, sort of thing, when we're not aware of it, it just runs the show, and good, bad, or indifferent, it does what it does.
yeah,
And as you were saying, it has beliefs and ways of doing things because that's the way it thinks it should be done. And I'm using it to describe part of us because it's not all of us. Again, it's less than 5%. A lot less we know, empirically speaking. But the thing is that the ego has programming, has patterns, has ways of doing things that it learned when we were very young.
mm,
Because from my philosophy, probably the same as you, when we come in, we don't have an ego until we're born. When we're born, the ego gets born at the same time. It's like it's part of our personality, so to speak. In
exactly.
fact, it's personality. And so as it grows, as we grow physically and as our ego grows, it learns things. And it learns why things should be a certain way and how things should be done, and what you do and don't do, because that's what it learns by trial and error.
Mhm.
And so for both of us, regardless of our upbringing, we've got a set of beliefs that we take into adulthood that we learned when we were very young. And we don't know any different. So, and this is something I loved. I remember hearing from one of the teachers I studied, which I love this thing again about codependency in a sense, because what we discover is when we start to look at the programming we've got, and we can basically say, why am I doing that? What's the reason behind it? And we let it go deeper. We don't force it to go deeper. We let the information go deeper, like asking the question, why is this happening? What drives this? We'll find that there's probably a reason. Actually, there's always a reason that the ego is doing what it's doing as a means to take care of us.
Yeah.
It's functional how it's doing it, but the goal is to take care of us always, because the ego wants to live and survive. So it's got to take care of the human form. So it doesn't want us to get hurt or injured ultimately, even though we might get emotionally upset, injured because of the aberrant behavior that is taken in place, because our ego doesn't know what's good or bad behavior. It just knows results.
Yeah, exactly.
So in the programming, what we end up doing in relationships and we do in life is we will tend to find things happening like through us, not that we're intending to do it. But for example, we may be acting too needy, or we may be acting too aloof because that's the way we discover that was safer to be when we're younger. It's
Yeah.
not what we want. We want to connect. We want to stay in loving. But because of the programming that we've taken on as the ego part of us is going to keep doing certain things which are almost the antithesis of what we really want.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. Yeah,
what's-
just to pick up on that for a second, because I think a lot of that ego defense is certainly for me, stay hidden, stay small, stay
right.
flat on that wrestling mat, don't get up, don't get beaten down again. That
Mhm.
served me as a child. That served
Absolutely.
me from getting bullied and picked on and called mean names because of my
Right.
environment I grew up in. That served me then. But what we do is we don't question that ego defense, and we carry it through our adulthood, and it
Yes.
impacts all of our relationships. But
Right.
I also wanted to add that because the question was how we overcame it, which is amazing. And I can see there's so many insights I had. I mean, like I said, the big ones, the spiritual nature that I am, the not
Mhm.
taking my thoughts so seriously. But I also wanted to share another one because I think it was really life changing for me too. Was when I realized that there is, at our innate nature, which is our spiritual nature, there's nothing damaged or
Right.
broken or lacking, and
Mhm.
and nothing to be fixed. And when again, I mean, all this had been up here, but it never really sank in until 2009. But when I saw when I really acknowledge that I am perfectly fine on the, on a spiritual level, the essence of who I am, the majority of who I am. Let's go back to 99 versus 1%. That makes it easier to say. That 1% believed that
Yeah.
she was broken, damaged, needed somebody to fix her, needed somebody to complete her. But once I kept connecting more to the 99%, that 99% of who I am, and realized that at that level, I had everything I needed. I didn't need to fix myself. As that happened, I'm going off track for a second. Let me think but what I was going to say is, I stopped trying to fix myself, and I
Hmm.
settled into the truth of who I was. That wonderful, comforting knowing that, hey, I'm okay. And if only I could get all that money back that I spent on 30 years of, I'm joking,
Well,
actually. All the, I
right.
had almost 30 years of therapy, workshops, ayahuasca trips, whatever things I did, they
Hmm.
all helped and a lot. They did help, but it was really the spiritual component that really brought the freedom that I was looking for. And
Right.
like you, I don't know like you, but I always say when I work with my clients, I do the dovetail of psychology and spirituality together. That's where the real healing comes. I don't think one without the other is as effective, and I don't think the other the other is effective. I think the way it comes together, understanding why you may have developed some of these habits and behaviors, and then
Hmm.
but pulling back and looking at it from the spiritual perspective, to me, is where the real healing, I mean, that's where my healing came from, and that's why I teach what I teach. But the
Yeah.
other thing I wanted to mention was, when I thought less of myself, when I didn't value myself, I didn't respect myself, my partner didn't value me and didn't respect me.
Yeah.
When they lied to me, I was lying to myself. I was
Hmm.
in denial. I didn't want to see the truth. And it was only when I was able to get to that place of, as you said, that loving ourselves, knowing that who we are and what we're made of, that I actually met somebody that loved me the way I love myself. And for
Hmm.
the last 13 years, I've been in the most beautiful relationship where I feel loved, seen, respected, cherished.
Yeah.
But it came about because I showed up differently.
That's the key.
And that's the key. And that's what so I wanted to pass it back to you, because I know you have a lot to say about this.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, yes, absolutely. So much of life is a reflection of where we treat ourselves. Like the way the world treats us is the way oftentimes we have been treating ourselves.
Mhm.
So if that's been happening out there, then look inside first, because it can be the best way to fix, resolve, and change that. But I want to finish up one piece about the ego piece, the ego having behaviors and beliefs. One of the wonderful things I learned through USM and other teachings too is the recognition is that the ego's purpose is to take care of us for survival.
Mhm.
Its way of doing that, the behavior it chooses, those avenues it goes down can be convoluted and can be less than ideal because we don't realize it. But when we investigate and we basically invite the ego to tell us why it's doing something, what's the motivation, what's it up to, it'll oftentimes tell us in very simple terms what that behavior is and why it's doing it. And
Mm.
when we realize it's no longer needed, because you're saying, like you said, we get these things very young and then we take them into adulthood without realizing there's anything right or wrong. We just trust they're working. When we actually get to look below the surface, so to speak, and ask and find out what the behaviors are that the ego is expressing that are, in quotes, taking care of us, but in fact are not giving us what we want,
Mhm.
we can realize that what's been executed, being done by the ego, is no longer serving us.
Yeah.
The key thing is, because the ego is a great tool user, so to speak, it uses what we give it very well. We can assign it new duties. So that ego, and I work with parts integration in my work too, which is like different parts of the ego, understanding that the part of the ego that's been working to protect us can do it a different way that is even more beneficial to us because we see better and we're more adult, clear vision, and also creates better results. And absolutely, by doing so, we change the relationship we have with the world around us. So in return, the universe treats us differently in return as well. So,
Mm.
like you were saying, relationship, as you change your own relationship with yourself and then respecting of yourself, you attracted somebody who did the same thing for you,
Yeah.
which is
Exactly.
what all of us can do in relationship.
Yeah,
It's the freedom.
they're mirrors. They mirror our relationship with ourselves. So I'm gonna put you on the spot, Barry. I want you to give an example of how a behavior, an innocent behavior that your ego is engaging in, that you could see, and how you talk to that ego part of yourself and redirect it, or how they, what, because you said we're basically giving them directions. So I'd love a real life example of how in relation to codependency, your ego is behaving in a certain way, and how you were able to redirect that.
Well, I'll see if I can do this, because just to be transparent as well,
Yeah.
when we do this work, sometimes those new paradigms just become like not forgotten, but no longer conscious, because
Mhm.
we don't need to think about them anymore. So I'm just looking back at anyone I can come up with. Now, also a sidebar for a second. One of my early careers in the world was doing computer programming. So I love this idea of logic and understanding the way that we're programming ourselves,
Mhm.
because that was what I was doing for business many, many years ago. So we as human beings, we program ourselves the same way. An example, one example I can come up with is basically I had a belief that I was afraid of people.
Mm.
So I think I said in my broadcast about being bullied in high school. So I wasn't comfortable or safe around people, around men especially, because I was bullied by other boys. And so as an adult, I carried a fear of other men unconsciously, just in the wiring of my ego, because I'd been hurt before by them. So when it came up to an opportunity to change it, what happened is I discovered that what my ego was doing is taking care of me by keeping me away, like not making male friendships, not bonding with other men. And the piece that shifted for me was really to understand and to say to my ego, to really have a different relationship, is saying those boys didn't know better.
Mhm.
Who I am now and the men I'm around now are a very different paradigm.
Yeah.
So I can be in different relationship now. And so now it's a matter of having discernment. And the key thing is that not to just throw out the old, like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, not throwing out the old programming, but to change the programming. Again, the words I'm using, the language I'm using, so that so my ego has discernment. It sees, it looks out there. Who are the men I can trust as brothers, and who are the men that I keep at arm's length?
Yeah.
Because the truth is, I have an innate intuition, maybe the right word, or a sensitivity to men that I can trust and men I can't trust. And rather than not trusting any men, because that was what I was raised with, that feeling, I could change the wiring so that my ego becomes more of a good guy detector, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so what happened was that I built a lot of friendships with men who I really trust, and there are other men that I don't. And I'm very clear on that inside myself. And it's not right, wrong, good, bad. Just like that person I can be around, that
Mhm.
person I won't.
Yeah.
And it's very simple.
I love what you're saying, and that's another topic when we listen to our intuition and our wisdom, because often when we grow up in an environment where the adults would say, "Oh, that's not true, that's not happening," we start not listening to our gut and our wisdom. But that's for another
Absolutely.
show. But today we're at time again. We could
Wow.
seriously go on forever. I always say that. So yes, so please join us again next week. I love these conversations with you, Barry. So thank you
Likewise.
so much. And I hope we were able to give you a little direction on what it was that we saw differently that changed how we showed up in the world.
Indeed. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.